Welcome everyone! Today we'll learn how to register a user from an Angular form using AspNetCore Identity. So create a new AspNetCore Entity application, define the name, select the .NET version, and create the project. The first step is to install a package to add AspNetCore Identity. So open the package manager console and type install package Microsoft.AspNetCore.Identity.Entity framework call. So in the project, create a new DB context, add the class, and it's similar to Entity Framework Call configuration, but in this case, this class will inherit from Identity DB context. Add the reference to the package, and this receives a generic parameter which will be our class to manage users. So add a new class called user and extend this class for the default identity user from AspNetCore Identity. Open the definition of this class. This default implementation from identity includes parameters such as ID, username, email, password hash, and more parameters. So go back to the user, save it, and in the AppDB context, pass the user class as the generic parameter and add a constructor to pass the default DB context options to the base class. Now go to the program.cs file and register the identity. So add builder.services.add identity. In this case, we'll manage users and roles from AspNetCore Identity. We're interested only on users to register a user. Add the user and add the default identity role to manage roles, and add the entity framework store, which will be our DB context. The next step is to connect with a SQL Server database. For this demo, we'll use a local SQL Express. I'll provide the link to download this database. So open the package manager console and install the package Microsoft.EntityFramework.SQL Server. So add the connection string from the SQL Server database, add a new section and add the respective connection string. So we define the server, which will be localhost /SQL Express, the database, the MDB, define two more parameters, trusted connection to trust the local certificate as true, and finally disable encryption. That's it. Go back and register the DB context and pass the connection string. So call builder.services.add DB context by passing the DB context class as a generic parameter, and in the options we'll use SQL Server and then pass the connection string. So access the iConfiguration interface to get the connection string values, and that's it. The next step is to create the AspNetCore Identity schema required to register an user. Open the package manager console, clear the console, and install Microsoft.EntityFramework.Tools, and then in the same console create an initial migration by typing @migration and the name of the migration as initial. It will output the migration file, which contains the detailed information about the tables that we will use to manage users and roles from AspNetCore Identity. We're interested only on this table, AspNet users, to register a user in this table. It contains all these rows, so you can view the detailed information about the database and the tables. So now let's create the database and the schema. So open the package manager console and type update database. Execute the command. So far so good. So to verify the creation of the schema, let's click on the View tab and open the SQL Server Object Explorer. Add a connection by clicking this icon. The server name will be localhost /SQL Express. Let's keep the username, the database name, select encrypt as false and trust the local certificate. Click connect, expand the databases, and you will see this demo DB, which contains all the tables required to manage users and roles from AspNetCore Identity. Now go to the program.cs file to create the endpoint to register a user. So let's create a simple post HTTP method from this minimal API. We'll receive a DTO from body called register user DTO. So create a class in this project. This DTO will contain 3 parameters. The first one will be the username, email, and finally the password. Go back to the program.cs file and inject this user manager class from AspNetCore Identity to manage users. Okay, and pass the parameter, which is the user class that we're using to manage users, and then transform the DTO to a new user by creating a new instance, and then set the email from the DTO and the username. Now call user manager that create a scene method to register a user by passing the user instance and the password. So finally, depending on the result of this method, so if the result is successful, we'll return an OK status code and pass the ID from the new user. Otherwise, we will return a bad request status code by passing the errors from the result. And that's it. Finally, in order to allow incoming requests from our Angular application, we will add course. So add course, registering services, and add it into the pipeline by calling use course and define the default policy, which will allow any origin, any method, and allow any header. That's it. Run the minimal API. It's ready to test. So go to Visual Studio Code to create the Angular application, to create a simple Angular form. So type ngn in a terminal to create a new Angular application. Define the name. I will inline styles, skip test, and select the defaults for simplicity. Open the Angular project. For this demo, we'll use a Bootstrap template. So go to the browser and we will use this simple sign up page. So click show code and copy the HTML content. Copy the content and go back. Open the component HTML, replace the sample code and paste it. And to apply the Bootstrap styles, we'll install MDB. So I'll provide the links in the description below. So in the installation guide, we'll scroll down and run this command in the terminal to add MDB. So open a new terminal, paste the command, and add this defaults option to select all the defaults. Select yes to proceed. It's installed, so start the application to see the sign up page, the sign up application with the default template. As you can see, this is the template. Now go back to the Angular application and connect with the minimal API. So open the TypeScript file. For this demo, we'll use template-driven forms to create a simple Angular form. So in the import section, add the forms module, create a new file that will be our user interface. We'll send this DTO to the minimal API with the same parameters, the username, email, and the password. Go back to the TypeScript file and create a new instance of this user interface. So initialize the properties. Let's leave it as empty. And now bind each property to the specific input in the HTML by using an ng model directive. Okay, so go to the HTML and in the first for control, type your username, define the ID for this input as username. Similarly for the name attribute, this input, and add the ng model directive to add two-way binding from user.username. This label comes from the username input based on the ID. So scroll down. Similarly, add the attributes for the email. add the ng model directive for the email field and the label, and finally for the password. So define the ID attribute, add the name attribute, copy the ng model directive from the password, and replace the label for attribute. Remove this div to repeat our password and remove the terms of service, which is not required. And from the register button, we'll add a click event to call our register user function from the TypeScript file. So save the HTML and declare the function in the TypeScript file. So to perform API requests, we need to add the HttpClient module and then create a construction and inject the HttpClient. So in the register user function, we will perform a post request by calling http.post, and we expect a number which will be the ID of the new user. Okay, so we need the URL from our API. So go back to the API, copy the URL. So copy the URL and pass the body, which will be the user instance, and then we will subscribe. Okay, so in the next callback function, we expect the ID, and when the new user is created, we will display an alert with a message: a new user was created with an ID, and pass the ID, and handle any exception with the error callback function, which will receive an object of type HTTP error response, and will also display an alert to notify failed to create an user and display the errors, and pass that error to display the error or errors that comes from the API endpoint. So that's it. It's time to test the Angular application. So go back to the browser, refresh, and we have the 3 required fields. We will not add validations in the front end and back end for simplicity, but you need to add the validations from the fields. So type the username, type the email, and finally fill the password. Click the register button, and a new alert is displayed by showing the ID of the new user. Click OK to verify that the user was added in the AspNet users database. Go back to Visual Studio, open the SQL Server Object Explorer, and select the AspNet users table. Right-click and view the data. As you can see, a new user is registered. So in this demo, we've learned how to register a user from an Angular form using AspNetCore Identity.